Hello gamers, Powered Heal here, and welcome to the Classic Plus Corner. This is a segment of the channel where we discuss all things related to WoW Classic Plus. This will be episode 13, and today we'll be talking about rated Battlegrounds or RBGs. So I was originally going to include this in the PvP video, but that video would have been really long if I included everything that I wanted in it, so I decided to kind of separate things into a bunch of different areas, and this is the one I wanted to focus on today. And I think this is a good starting point. We're going to make a video on should you add Arena, but it's probably better to start with RBGs first. Maybe these videos will actually release at the same time. But I think that the reason why I want to talk about RBGs first just has to do with the fact that they are kind of the more natural fit, I feel, for Classic Plus, and I'll talk about why that is now. So basically, the community has been kind of clamoring for RBGs for a long time. Even if you go back to like SOD, when that came out, people were talking about RBGs. Now, the thing with SOD is we basically got like a month's notice between when the game was kind of announced and when the game actually launched. So when you kind of take that into account, there wasn't really that much time for the devs to make too much adjustments. But really, it didn't seem like they wanted RBGs in that version of the game. And that was probably because the fact that it was, very experimental. It was going to be, in their minds, heavily imbalanced. And they didn't want to add kind of a competitive system into the game and really give the game a competitive vibe when they were just adding all these kind of wacky, crazy abilities, especially given the fact that they were kind of just mostly tossing them in there for PvE. I feel like they weren't really doing much in terms of PvP balancing. And, things would just kind of be left where they were for PvP, right? If an ability was really good in there, that's what it was. If it was bad, that's what it was. It was kind of an is-what-it-is situation. And they eventually did some adjustments, but ultimately, I think it's probably a good idea that they, kept RBGs from SOD because it could have been a disaster. It may have actually even kind of had a bad precedent going forward or put one forth in the sense that, people would be like, oh, this is proof that RBGs don't work in Classic or something like that. And I don't think that'll be the case come Classic Plus, but definitely for a game like SOD that was highly experimental, I think it was a good idea to restrain themselves a bit. Now, going into Classic Plus, we don't really have this problem, okay, because theoretically, a bunch of the kinks should be worked out in terms of what they want to add to the game, so there's really no excuse for why we couldn't have a bit of a more competitive battleground system. Now, something that people often talk about, and this is sort of related to the thing that we just talked about, is that competitive aspect in general, right? They feel like even if, you had kind of reasonable class balance, Classic isn't really a place for competitiveness, right? And, competitiveness tends to be something that the players can kind of inject into the game. Think of something like speedrunning. It's mostly a player-run thing. It's not really supported by Blizzard by any means. The times don't even get posted on a Blizzard official website or anything like that. So it's pretty much all done by the player base. And I can understand that argument, but I don't think it really has to be the case where it has to be like this mutually exclusive thing where, Blizzard can't get involved and facilitate some competitive stuff from time to time. In fact, I actually think that, if Blizzard just added like ladders and stuff for the PvE stuff, that would be cool even. Like not even necessarily talking about PvP, but even if they added kind of like speedrunning ladders where they had, just very obvious, simple rules for people to go by, that would actually be really cool. They could put the top times on like a segment of the website or something like that. I think that'd be really fun. And I actually am really surprised that they haven't done this for Race to the World First stuff. They're very uninvolved with a lot of stuff like this. And I think that can be a good thing in some ways in terms of the organization and things of that nature. But it surprises me that there's no sort of recognition, at least kind of after the fact on some of these things. They might make Twitter posts here and there or something of that nature, but I'm just surprised that they don't get a little bit more involved and at least help the players create a better situation, right? So they don't necessarily have to create these competitive environments themselves all the time, but helping the players kind of create their own competitive environment, I think it is helpful. And this is what I see Arena kind of being as for a Classic Plus. I don't really see it as being something where you get gear from it. And I think this is a big problem for a lot of people, and this is a big reason why they don't want to see anything competitive kind of cross over into WoW Classic, because it's like, well, even though obviously for Classic Plus we're going to try and have much better balance than we did in SOD, even the original Classic version of the game isn't very kind of balanced, quote unquote, PvP wise, right? You have things like crazy long duration saps and polys and things of that nature. And, if you notice, when you go into the Burning Crusade, there was a big effort to kind of homogenize a lot of this stuff to really adjust a bunch of the PvP cooldowns and things of that nature. They took a long, hard look at a lot of those abilities. And in some sense, I don't even know that we really got a ton of abilities in the Burning Crusade. I mean, we did get some, right? But it was more about making adjustments and kind of refining all those things to almost be sort of like a more esporty experience for PvP and PvP as PvE and PvP as well. So I understand like why people maybe don't want to go down that road, because they think that having these kind of sort of imbalances here and there are things that kind of make classes special. Like they'd rather a class be like a little bit imbalanced in certain situations and then maybe be more hard counted in other situations, because it preserves the class identity and kind of puts up some defenses against the complete homogenization of a lot of classes that we see in retail now. So I totally get that, but I think if you kept it to be something where it was just for vanity, just for bragging rights, then you could easily bring RBGs into the game. So you wouldn't really change the PvP system. You wouldn't necessarily get points from doing RBGs. You could kind of just get normal honor. I don't think that would be a problem. So if you kept the honor system as the way it is, and I made a video as to why we should actually keep the current honor system with some adjustments, as I think it really does fit the kind of like the idea of classic WoW progression really well. And you could just have Rated Battlegrounds kind of provide honor. Maybe they could even provide a little bit more honor than normal. And the idea is, hey, if you're really going to put yourself into the arena, and you're going to fight in like the higher ranks, then you can get maybe your honor caps or whatever quicker than other players. So it allows like a player who maybe doesn't have as much time but is really truly good at the game, if he's pushing like whatever the highest rank is at the time, if it's like 2.4k, 2.5k, 2.8k, whatever it is, if he's in that bracket and he's getting wins, then yes, he should be rewarded, heavily compensated with honor. Right, I don't think that there's any problem with that whatsoever. So you could do stuff like that, but I guess what I'm saying is you wouldn't want to have a separate system where somebody needed to participate in the RBGs to cap out their honor every week or get a certain amount of conquest points to put towards gear, because that kind of forces all the player base in, and I think that's kind of the thing that we don't want. I kind of imagine these RBGs as almost being like a super sweat fest, and I don't think many casual players will honestly want to go into them, to be honest. But I think that's kind of okay. I think that's okay because I don't think that there needs to be a ton of development time that goes into them either. Because you already have the Battlegrounds at base. What we're doing here is kind of just making a rating system, right, which we already have in versions from other games. Then we adjust the rules of the Battlegrounds specifically. And realistically, I think that they'll probably make some adjustments to the rules of the Battlegrounds more generally, just in, Classic Plus in general. So, for example, you might see something like Warsong Gulch having a timer, even in the normal version of the game. So, therefore, adjusting it in something like an RBG wouldn't be that much of a jump. Fixing some of the exploitive things, like being able to get off of the map in some cases is obviously really bad. Get to spots where, other people can't get to you. It's a certain class and things of that nature. So, they're probably going to want to do a bunch of these fixes anyway, just to make the Battleground experience in the normal game better. And it'd be very easy to sort of translate these over into something like an RBG. I don't think it'd really be a problem at all. And if you don't have a reward system that corresponds with the Rated Battlegrounds, then, you don't need a reason to kind of like force other players into playing, or not force other players, but coax the normal player base into playing it, right? Because that's kind of the big worry is if you put really good gear behind this, especially in a version of the game where maybe there's not really a clear demarcation between what's good PvP gear and what's good PvE gear, because a lot of people seem resistant to that. So if you keep rewards that can kind of be used in both, then a lot of people are going to try and come into the PvP scape in order to get rewards for PvE or something like that. And if you make it where they have to participate in the rank system, then there's just going to be a lot of frustration there, right? And I think it's much better off to just reserve that for the people who really want to go for it, like they want the server pride, they want the region pride, whatever it is. They want to be the best horde team, the best alliance team, the best team overall. And there's a ton of interest in that, in my opinion. And there's Power Heal's phone, like clockwork. But yeah, there's a ton of interest in that. And if you talk to any of these kind of like old school PvP players like Perplexity, I think this is something that he would like absolutely adore. Just having a rated Battleground system where you can kind of make a team, go in there, and just, you're playing against the best teams. And the nice thing is that if you have the honor system as sort of separate for this, and or you kind of fix the Battlegrounds to reward kind of like the smaller Battlegrounds a bit more equally, you're not going to see a ton of the behavior, I feel like, that you see during a typical ranking climb, right? Because if everybody is kind of able to get their gear, hit their caps rather, in a reasonable amount of time, there's not going to be this crazy dodging of other pre-made teams, right? Right now, if you're doing an honor grind during the actual phase of the game where the actual ranked rewards are out, and you're a pre-made and you hit another pre-made, the reason why people try and dodge this is because the game is no time limit. People can actually grief you if they want, right? They can, like, especially if they're like, they feel like they're losing or something like that, like they can just go out of their way to like completely grief you. So it can be a really frustrating experience, right? If you make all these adjustments and you have the ranking system be something in itself on the side that you're progressing towards with the RBGs, but the RBGs aren't a necessary component to get there, I think it just makes things smoother on all parties, on the parties that want to compete at a high level, on the parties that just want to have fun in Battlegrounds, and on the parties that just want to have access to the PvP system, without being like the best player in the world. And kind of touching on that point, why not attach kind of like rewards to the ranking system, right? Where I already gave you a couple reasons, but there's going to be some people that I think they intrinsically just think, well, the hardest content should reward the best loot. And in PvP, it's not really like PvE where we have different tiers of content. The tiers kind of come from the players, right? So that's where the whole concept in TBC of kind of the rankings came in and the ranking requirements on certain gear. The idea is there's a ranking stratification where, if you're above, let's say 2200 was it back in the day for shoulders, I think the requirements are much lower now, but let's say it was 2200, and the idea is just that, hey, this guy has proved that he's essentially at the top of PvP, so we're going to give him a reward that is commensurate with that. Similarly to how if you've cleared Sunwell, you get access to the best items in Sunwell. I've already explained this in another video, but I'll kind of touch upon it briefly here. I just don't think that this works really well for Classic. Big reason is because a lot of the game is sort of focused around this idea of time investment and being rewarded for time investment rather than raw skill. Right now, I think you can kind of, like I said in the other example just moments ago, you can kind of compensate for both of these a bit, right? So you could make it so that you get faster gains or returns the higher skill you have. So if you did add an RBG and you were competing in Warsong Gulch at like 2500 MMR or whatever it happens to be at the time, if you were really high up there, that scaling with the honor you get from the game would be fantastic, right? So you are getting some sort of a reward for being a better player. However, it should be nothing that another player couldn't neutralize with time, even if they're a worse player, right? And I think this is just healthy in general because it kind of encourages people to keep playing even though they might not be the greatest, right? So, they ultimately everybody has to start somewhere, and this idea that, oh, well, I'm going to get basically no points or I have no chance of getting this cool gear, until I get really good at the game, that doesn't really feel exactly like progression, right? And instead, if they just get the same gear, but maybe get it a little bit slower, it takes them longer to do, so they can still be on pace with you for like a week-to-week basis, but actually getting the caps per week is slower for them, right? If they're not as good at the game, I think that's a completely reasonable, path to gearing. And the other thing that I've talked about in other videos is that you don't really want, I feel like, people to not have access to this gear inevitably, right? I think that would just be kind of really bad, because if you're already the best player, and I talked about this in other videos with a Destiny 2 comparison, where I played Destiny 2 for a period of time, and there was one expansion where they basically released a weapon that, in order to get it, it was like the best weapon in the game, had the fastest time to kill, which was kind of an anomaly because most of the time weapons in Destiny don't actually augment your time to kill on the weapon in like an absolute sense. You may get conditional increases to time to kill, like after you get a frag or something like that, but not like kind of right out of the gate, not at the base power level of the weapon. So this is a very unique thing, and you had to get the highest rank in Destiny 2 to get it. And once I got that, it was just pretty boring, right? Because I was already a better player than 99.99% of these players for having gotten the rank, and then now I have an even bigger advantage over them, which kind of makes zero sense. I understand that in MMOs, part of the kind of skill is progressing quickly through the game and acquiring items in an efficient way, right? So the idea is people have in mind is that, well, I should be able to leverage my skills in that area into the fact that I have better gear, and that should give me an advantage over people. And like I said, I think that it's fine if it just accelerates the rate at which you get stuff, but having a game where it's just incredibly hard to get gear from the highest level stuff, I think most people are just they're not looking for that in WoW Classic nowadays. And I think that would be a big mistake. I think it's a mistake in PvE too. I can maybe make a separate video about that, but having just really hard raid content, I think is not the answer going forward in Classic Plus, like trying to gatekeep percentages of the population and then nerfing it slowly over time to allow more and more people. People just aren't looking for that. So, yeah, I don't know. I think that it'll be a much healthier sort of scene if you do have the RBGs in. They're not tied to any special reward. Like you still get the normal currencies, but nothing that you couldn't get from anywhere else. And it's mostly just for bragging rights and things of that nature. And I think with RBGs, it makes the most sense to add them because they're kind of like the true spirit of vanilla WoW, in a sense, right? These Battlegrounds have almost become like cult classics. Like the people who love Warsong really love Warsong. The people who love Arathi Basin really love Arathi Basin. So I think at least making sure that we have sort of a competitive version for these people to kind of test their mettle against each other and flex on each other is really important. And Arena is sort of a different conversation you can have down the road. And I'll probably talk about that in a video very soon. But yeah, I think definitely focus on RBGs first. Those should be in there. Like I said, rewards should be cosmetic, titles, things of that nature, just the normal stuff you get like honor. Keep the PvP system relatively the same, and just let people go out and flex. And in terms of the rules, I think that, they'd have to depend on the battleground, obviously, specifically, but just general things that we'd want that we see from RBGs in the normal game, and things we'll probably have in the normal battlegrounds in the normal game as well, like, just timers, exploit fixing, things of that nature. Nothing too complicated. I think that the consume usage will kind of work itself out. I think you should be allowed to use consumes, but if you have a 15-minute timer or a 25-minute timer on Warsong Gulch, that's automatically going to limit the amount of consumes you can use, because most consumes are on a timer. For stuff that's not on a timer, like things like maybe Flask of Distilled Wisdom, that should probably just be changed. Realistically, how Flask of Distilled Wisdom works should just be changed in general, right? And then we wouldn't have that problem in particular. But anything like that has sort of like an infinite uses, you could kind of look into on a one-off basis and adjust it for RBGs. But I think most stuff, since most stuff does have a cooldown, it's fine to, have that, just stay how it is. You could even have something like where if you enter an RBG, something like your rocket helm maybe comes off cooldown. So like realistically, you'll have like one rocket helm use per RBG potentially. You wouldn't have to have that, but it could be something that you could do if you really wanted, So yeah, I think common sense rules, just like I said, purely for pride and things of that nature. No exclusive gear or something like that. Titles, cosmetics, keep it in that vicinity. and you'll have a lot of happy people coming into Classic Plus. So thank you guys so much for watching. If you like this, like, comment, and subscribe. I will talk to you guys next time.